I gave my father a Rolex, and he said that money isn't important here and that he will always respect me. So here it is, the story of the last time I tried to earn my father's respect, and the day I realized it was never going to happen. My name's Alex. I'm 32 years old. I work as a technical consultant, and I guess you could say I've spent most of my life trying to impress a man who never really saw me. My father, Dale, is 61 now. He's an old-school accountant, the kind who still uses paper ledgers and thinks Excel is too flashy. He's the type who believes that hard work means putting on a tie, staying late, and saying as little as possible. I used to think he was just tough. Now I know he's just cold. Growing up, Dale was the kind of dad who'd show up to your baseball game and then criticize your swing form all the way home. Never a good job, or I'm proud of you. Just silence, or worse, that quiet sigh of disappointment. I got used to it. Or at least, I thought I did. Father's Day was always a weird thing in our family. My mom would get him some boring tie or a bottle of scotch. He'd grunt something like, "You shouldn't have," and that would be it. I never really bothered with anything special after I turned 16. It just didn't seem worth it. But this year, I thought maybe I'd try one last time. Maybe give him something real. Maybe make him see me. I spent 3 weeks researching watches. Not just any watches. I wanted something elegant, timeless. Something that said, "Thank you," without actually having to say it, because God knows we don't talk like that. I settled on an Omega Speedmaster. Black dial, stainless steel, manual wind, sapphire crystal front and back. $13,000. I had to dip into my savings, and yes, I know how dumb that sounds now. But at the time, it felt like the only way to finally reach him. I even had the back engraved. "Thank you for everything, Alex." 5 words. Cost me another couple hundred just to get it done right. Because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it perfectly. Father's Day came. I drove out to their house. My mom greeted me at the door like always, surprised to see me holding a small velvet box. I think she thought I was proposing to someone. I didn't even sit down. I just handed the box to my father where he was, in his recliner, the same spot he sat in every evening for the last 20 years. He opened it slowly, and I'll never forget the way he blinked when he saw it. Not surprise, not joy, just that same flat stare, like he was looking at a tax return that didn't add up. "It's a Speedmaster," I said. "Manual wind. I know you hate quartz." He picked it up, turned it over, read the engraving, then looked at me. No smile, no emotion, just this small nod. "You shouldn't have," he muttered. I tried to brush it off. "I just wanted to say thank you. For, well, everything. You always did your best." That's when he said it. "You'll always be last." He didn't even look up when he said it. Just kept turning the watch in his hands like it was a piece of junk from a pawn shop. My mom froze in the kitchen. I felt like someone had dropped a bag of cement on my chest. I couldn't even speak. I just stood there, waiting for something else. A chuckle, a wink, a sign that it was a joke. But it wasn't. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. "You'll always be last." Last in what? His affections? His priorities? His respect? I don't know. I just know that in that moment, something broke. Not in a dramatic, movie scene way. More like a quiet snap. A realization. I left without saying another word. Drove home in silence. I didn't even listen to music, just sat in traffic with that phrase bouncing around my head like a curse. I still have the receipt for the watch. I thought about returning it, but part of me wanted to leave it with him. Let it sit on his wrist like a reminder that he had a son once who tried, really tried, to earn something that should have been free. That was the last time I spoke to him. I didn't call him on his birthday. I didn't go to Thanksgiving. When my mom texted me on Christmas morning, I just replied, "Tell him I said Merry Christmas." Dale worked at the same company for over 40 years and wore that fact like a badge of honor, as if the sheer duration of his loyalty somehow gave meaning to the job itself. It didn't matter that he never got promoted beyond middle management or that he spent most of his time doing repetitive, mind-numbing ledger work in a dim office under flickering fluorescent lights. What mattered to him was that he never missed a day. Not for illness, not for family, not even when his own mother died. He left the funeral early to make it in time for the end-of-quarter meeting. That's who he was. I remember being 6 years old, curled up on the couch with a fever so high I could barely keep my eyes open. My mom hovered nearby with a wet cloth, but Dale walked in, took one look at me, and said, "If you can sit up, you can go to school." He said it like it was gospel, and I actually believed him. I got dressed, vomited on the kitchen floor 5 minutes later, and still remember how disappointed he looked. Not because I was sick, but because I wasn't strong enough to fake it. That's what I grew up with. This idea that pain wasn't something you acknowledged, it was something you swallowed. Crying was weakness. Talking about your feelings was self-indulgent. Resting was laziness in disguise. When I fell off my bike at 8 and cracked 2 ribs, Dale told me to stop whining and walk it off. It was only after my mom insisted that he took me to the ER. Even then, he stood in the waiting room, arms crossed, visibly annoyed that we were wasting a perfectly good Saturday. He believed suffering was proof of value. The more you endured, the more you were worth. But only if you endured it silently. And that mindset bled into every corner of our house. We weren't allowed to complain about school. If we were tired, it was because we were lazy. If we struggled with anything, it was because we weren't trying hard enough. And when I say we, I mostly mean me. My sister got a lot more leeway. It was like she was exempt from the same rules, or maybe he just didn't expect as much from her. But I, his only son, was supposed to carry the torch. So when I told him, at 17, that I wanted to study computer science, he stared at me like I'd just confessed to being a disappointment on purpose. "You're going to sit behind a desk and play on a computer all day," he said. "That's not work. That's a life for wimps." He said it again later, in front of my uncles at a barbecue. They all laughed, and I laughed too, even though my face burned with shame. I wasn't even sure why I was ashamed. Maybe because part of me still wanted his approval, even though I knew I'd never get it. When I got my first job out of college, making more money than he ever did in his life, he asked if I was still pushing buttons all day. No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just another jab. That was the year I stopped trying to share good news with him. What was the point? Every accomplishment was either dismissed or mocked. When I bought my first car, he asked how many months it would take me to crash it. When I moved into my own apartment, he asked if I had a backup plan for when I inevitably failed and came crawling back. He couldn't see success unless it looked exactly like his version of it. A hard hat, a briefcase, a long commute, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a body that hurt at the end of the day. That was the only proof he understood. Me working from home, sitting at a desk, managing projects, designing systems, that wasn't work to him. That was make-believe, a luxury, something he thought I'd give up the moment life got hard. But life got hard, and I didn't give it up. I got promoted. I started managing a team. I bought a better car, and then a small house. I kept moving forward, building something real, even if he never saw it that way. Every time we talked, which wasn't often, he made it clear that, in his eyes, I hadn't earned any of it. Because I didn't suffer the right way. I think that's what burned the most. Not the criticism itself, but the total lack of recognition that I was carrying my own weight, just in a different way. He couldn't see that stress can be silent, that mental exhaustion is just as real as physical pain. That working 12 hours a day on a complex system takes as much grit as hauling lumber or balancing spreadsheets. To him, if you weren't covered in sweat or bruises, you weren't doing anything worth respecting. I stopped trying to make him see it a long time ago. But sometimes, even now, I catch myself imagining what it would feel like to hear him say something as simple as "good job." Not even, "I'm proud of you." Just "good job." And I hate that it still matters. Because it shouldn't. But it does. When I finally hit that milestone, 400 grand a year, a number I used to daydream about during long nights studying for my computer science finals, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I was 32, consulting for some of the biggest banks in the country, designing and implementing multi-layered security systems that protected billions of dollars and sensitive client data. I was constantly flying out to meet CTOs and lead their teams through crises they couldn't solve without me. I had recruiters from top firms emailing me weekly, practically begging me to jump ship. I had my own office, a private parking space, and more than enough money to live comfortably. To anyone else, I'd made it. I was respected in my field, paid extremely well, and consistently asked to lead projects that directly impacted national-level infrastructure. But to Dale, my father, I was still just a kid playing with computers. I remember telling him over dinner one night at this steakhouse downtown. It was a rare occasion, just the two of us. I had picked the place specifically because I thought he'd like it. No fuss, old school, mahogany everywhere. I even wore a damn blazer to make it feel like something important. And when the check came, I made a point of grabbing it, sliding my platinum card into the leather folder like I was some hotshot in a movie. Not because I wanted to show off, but because I wanted him to see it. To notice. I waited until the waiter walked away, then told him I'd just crossed the 400K mark that month. I didn't say it smugly. I said it the way you say something you hope will change the air in the room. The way you look at someone and wait for their face to change, for something to soften. He didn't even blink. He chewed a piece of steak, dabbed his mouth with the napkin, and said, "Well, I guess someone's paying for toys." That was his reaction. No questions. No curiosity. Just that flat, dismissive jab. I could have told him I'd invented a cure for cancer, and I'm pretty sure he would have asked if I was still wasting time on the internet. I told him about the clients I worked with. I told him how I'd led the overhaul of a banking system that had been outdated for over a decade, how I'd caught vulnerabilities in their software that could have led to massive data leaks. He didn't even nod, just kept eating, then said, Computers won't make you a man. That line hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't new. He'd been saying variations of it since I was a teenager. But hearing it then, after everything I'd accomplished, after years of trying to prove myself, it felt like someone had slammed a door in my face for the 1000th time. Not slammed, just quietly closed it, without looking back. In his eyes, being a man meant physical labor, sacrifice, suffering in silence. It meant having calloused hands, a sore back, and the ability to fix a lawnmower with a coat hanger and some duct tape. He never understood that I built things too, just not out of wood or metal. I built systems, layers of protection, digital fortresses that kept entire corporations safe. But to him, none of that mattered. Because there was no grease under my fingernails. Because my work didn't leave bruises. He liked to compare our lives, subtly. Like when he'd say, "Back when I was your age, I already had 2 kids and a mortgage I could barely afford." As if that struggle made him superior. As if the lack of suffering in my life meant I hadn't earned anything. When I bought my house, modern, spacious, with a home office I'd spent weeks setting up, he walked in, looked around, and said, "Looks like a hotel." No comment on the smart wiring I'd installed myself. No reaction to the fact that I'd paid for it entirely on my own, without loans or help. Just that blank stare, followed by a quiet sigh. I stopped inviting him over after that. Stopped telling him about raises, new contracts, travel gigs. Because what was the point? To him, I'd always be the soft one. The keyboard jockey. The guy who made a living staring at screens. And I think what made it worse was knowing he wasn't proud. Not even quietly. I don't need applause or constant validation, but I think every kid, no matter how old, wants to know their dad is proud of them. That all the hours, the late nights, the stress and burnout and effort meant something. But with Dale, there was nothing. Just the quiet judgment that I hadn't suffered enough to count. He never asked me what my job actually involved. Never once said, "Tell me about your work." Not even out of politeness. If it didn't involve spreadsheets and a calculator, he couldn't be bothered. He saw computers as toys. My clients, my contracts, my salary, just things I got for being clever with gadgets. Sometimes I wonder if he even knows what I really do. If he could describe it to someone. I doubt it. To him, I'm not a professional. I'm a grown man who never got his hands dirty. A technician at best. A fraud at worst. And the worst part? I still hoped he'd change. Even now, I catch myself thinking maybe, one day, something I say will actually land. Maybe I'll explain a project and he'll finally say, "That's impressive." But I know he won't. Because to Dale, respect is only earned through pain. And no amount of success will ever look like pain to him. Amber has always been the perfect one. She's 3 years younger than me. And somehow she managed to nail the role of golden child from the moment she could string a sentence together. She was the sweet one, the helpful one, the nurse from Oregon who called home every Sunday like clockwork, who never raised her voice or questioned our parents, who always said the right thing and wore the right clothes and dated the kind of guys my dad approved of. Dale practically glowed when he talked about her. "Your sister's got her head on straight," he'd say with that hint of pride he never once directed my way. What they don't know, what nobody knows, is that I was the reason she made it through college without drowning in debt. She was 2 years into nursing school when the cracks started to show. Her scholarships had dried up, her part-time job couldn't keep up with her rent and books, and she was too proud to ask for help. I remember getting a call from her late one night, her voice shaking, trying to sound calm while telling me she was thinking about dropping out because she couldn't make the next tuition payment. I didn't even hesitate. I wired her the money the next morning. It wasn't a lot, not for me at that time, maybe $7,000, but I told her I'd handle the rest too. We made a deal. I'd pay off whatever she owed, as long as she promised never to tell our parents. Not a word. I made her swear, because I knew what would happen if Dale found out. He'd twist it, make it about me trying to buy her loyalty or show off. Or worse, he'd take credit for it somehow. Family helps each other, he'd say, conveniently forgetting how often he'd told me to figure things out on my own. So she kept the secret. I paid off her tuition and then her student loans. $60,000 over 4 years. Quietly. No fuss. No thank you dinners or framed diplomas on the wall. I didn't do it for attention. I did it because she's my sister and she deserved better than to start her life under a mountain of debt. But that didn't stop the ache every time I heard Dale talk about how proud he was of her. How she was responsible and hardworking and never asked for anything. How she pulled herself up. I wanted to scream every time I heard it. Not because I resented her, I never have, but because I realized how blind he was. How quick he was to praise her for traits he would never believe I had, even when I was quietly doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes. I didn't need a trophy, but it would have been nice to hear, just once, that I wasn't the screw-up in the family. That maybe I was doing something right too. Amber knew. She tried to bring me into the picture sometimes, but Dale always redirected the conversation. "Your brother's doing all right with his computer stuff, I guess," he'd say, like I was a high schooler dabbling in a hobby, not someone running high-level infrastructure for major banks. And if she ever hinted at me being generous, he'd shut it down with a grunt or a change of topic. Once, she sent me a card. Nothing fancy, just a handwritten note that said, "I know what you've done for me. I'll never forget it." I kept it tucked inside a drawer in my desk for years. I'd look at it sometimes when I felt invisible, just to remind myself that someone saw me. But that card was the only acknowledgement I ever got. Amber still calls every Sunday. She updates them on her shifts, her patients, her boyfriend who teaches high school science and volunteers with the local fire department. They eat it up, and I listen from the sidelines, the son who makes too much money doing work they don't understand, who never calls unless something's wrong, the one who's still trying to prove he belongs. Sometimes I wonder if they'd see me differently if they knew the truth, if they realized that their perfect daughter owes part of her so-called independence to the son they never respected. But then I remember how Dale measures worth. In obedience, in appearances, in the ability to never ask for help. Amber followed the rules. I rewrote them, and for that, I'll always be second. It started with a phone call. My mom, quiet, hesitant, asking if I had a minute to talk about something serious. It was during the tail end of the financial crisis, when the markets were still a mess and everyone was scrambling to stay afloat. Dale had taken a hit, some kind of investment fallout, maybe a partial layoff. I don't even remember the exact details anymore, because he never told me himself. It was Mom who called. It's always Mom who delivers the bad news while he stays in the background, too proud or too stubborn to speak the words himself. They were going to fall behind on the mortgage. Not by a lot at first, just a few missed payments that were about to snowball into something worse. She didn't ask for much. Just 6 months of help, she said. Enough to give them breathing room, let them get back on their feet. I didn't even hesitate. I asked how much the payment was, and she told me, $2, $198.43 a month. Almost an oddly precise number, as if being exact somehow made it feel more manageable. I opened a new account the next day and named it Family Expenses because I thought I was being organized, professional, like this was just another contract I'd taken on. Every month, like clockwork, I transferred the full mortgage payment into their account. No questions, no delays. I even covered a few additional bills when they were behind, utilities, insurance, the odd repair here and there. It was supposed to be 6 months. It turned into 3 years. 3 years of paying almost $2,200 a month. That's over 79 grand when you add it all up. I tracked every payment. I had spreadsheets, email confirmations, auto-transfer logs. Not because I expected to be repaid, I never did, but because I needed to remind myself that it was real, that I was doing something big, that I was keeping their home intact while Dale sat in that same recliner every night, flipping through channels and acting like everything was fine. They never said thank you. Not once. No cards. No emails. No calls on the first of the month. Not even a nod of acknowledgement during the holidays or my birthday. If anything, Dale got more distant, more cold. Maybe it bruised his ego to know that his son was bailing him out. Maybe he hated that I had the kind of financial security he never reached. Or maybe he just couldn't bring himself to admit he needed help. I remember one Thanksgiving, maybe a year and a half into it, sitting at the table while he told a story about how real men provide for their families, no matter what. He said it without irony, without looking at me. I just sat there with a tight smile and a knot in my chest, listening to him pretend that everything in that house hadn't been held together by my bank account for over a year. There were months when it hurt to send that money. I was juggling contracts, dealing with burnout, trying to keep my own life stable. But I never missed a payment. Not once. I cut back on travel, delayed replacing my car, even turned down a move to a more expensive apartment, also I could keep that account alive. Family expenses. Neat. Clean. Quiet. I thought maybe, at the end of it, when the mortgage was finally paid off and they were back on track, I'd get something. Not money back, but a gesture. A letter. A dinner. A sentence. Anything. But the last transfer went through just like the first. No message. No call. Just silence. They kept living like I hadn't done anything. Like the lights stayed on by magic. Like the bank had just been understanding for 3 years. Dale still talks about how he never needed a bailout. I hear him say that sometimes, usually when he's bragging to relatives or complaining about taxes. I don't correct him. I stopped trying a long time ago. But every time I log into my accounts and see that old family expenses entry sitting there in the archives, I feel it. The weight of what I gave. Not just the money, but the peace of mind they never had to ask for again. The roof over their heads. The quiet dignity they maintained while I quietly paid for it. And they never even said thank you. The barbecue was supposed to be my last-ditch effort. A sort of peace offering, I guess. Or maybe a desperate attempt to pull some kind of warmth out of people who'd made a habit of ignoring everything I did unless it was to criticize it. I spent weeks planning it, down to the smallest detail. I wanted it to be perfect. I rented a tent in case of rain, hired a local catering company that did these amazing sliders and smoked ribs, brought in a bartender to mix drinks in the backyard. I even splurged on lighting and a sound system so there'd be music without someone having to mess around with Bluetooth speakers. The final bill came out to $2,800, not counting the grocery run I did myself for drinks and snacks and backup coolers. I hosted it at my place, like always. My house has the space, the layout, the backyard everyone loves when it's convenient for them. I trimmed the hedges, pressure washed the patio, even brought in a landscaping guy to make sure the lawn looked good. The morning of the party, I was running around like a maniac, checking with the caterers, setting up the tent, unloading ice, fixing a minor plumbing issue in the guest bathroom. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours the night before, but I didn't care. I kept telling myself it would be worth it. That maybe, for once, they'd see the effort for what it was. People started showing up around 3. My sister Amber came first, of course, perfect as always with a bottle of wine and a smile that made our mom beam. The rest of the family followed. My cousins, aunts, a couple of neighbors who always showed up to these things when the food was good and the drinks were flowing. By 5 o'clock, the place was buzzing. It looked great. Everything ran smoothly. The bartender had a line of people asking for mojitos and old fashions, and the ribs were falling off the bone. I stood off to the side for a moment and actually felt proud, not just of how it looked, but of the fact that I'd done it all. Quietly, cleanly, like a professional. Then I heard my mother talking to one of my aunts near the patio. She was going on about how hard she'd worked to pull this all together. Well, I told the caterers to go light on the sauce. Alex can't cook for these many people, so I had to step in. She laughed like it was some inside joke. I just stood there, holding my drink, listening to her claim credit for a party she hadn't lifted a finger to help with. Not a dime spent, not a call made. She showed up wearing a sun hat and handed out compliments like they were hers to give, and now she was acting like she was the one who pulled the whole thing off. I didn't say anything, just nodded politely when someone asked for directions to the bathroom, walked into the house, and poured myself another drink. And of course, Dale had to make it worse. He showed up an hour late, muttered something about traffic, then walked around like he was doing a house inspection. Didn't even try the food right away. Just stood near the fence, arms crossed, scanning the yard like he was looking for something to disapprove of. And of course, he found it. "Why aren't the leaves cleaned up near the fence?" he asked, not even looking at me when he said it. Just gesturing at the far corner of the yard like I'd committed some kind of crime. I blinked. "It's a barbecue, Dad. I can see that. But it wouldn't have killed you to rake that area first. Looks sloppy." That was it. That was his big contribution. Not, "The food's great," or "This is a nice setup," or "Thanks for hosting." Just pointing out a few leaves near the fence line, as if that invalidated everything else. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him what the party cost, how many hours I spent making sure it didn't fall apart, how much I still wanted him to just acknowledge that I was trying. But I didn't. I just smiled and nodded like I always do. I stood there in my own backyard, surrounded by people eating my food and drinking my liquor, listening to my father complain about leaves. It was the last time I tried to impress him. I didn't know it then, but I knew I felt tired in a way I couldn't explain. Like something inside me had finally given up, quietly, without ceremony. Like I'd just realized the obvious. No matter what I do, no matter how perfect the setup, it'll never be enough. Not for them. Not for him. I stood in the living room, holding out the box with the Omega watch inside, feeling the weight of every second that passed. Dale sat in his usual recliner, remote balanced on the armrest, a game show humming quietly in the background like static. He didn't even mute the volume. I handed it to him anyway, the velvet box small, but somehow heavy in my hand. The engraving inside read, "Thank you for everything, Alex." Words I had chosen carefully, against my better judgment, because I wanted to believe there was still a version of him that could be reached. He opened the box slowly, like it was something he had to get over with. He stared at the watch for a few seconds, tilted it slightly as if checking for flaws, then looked at me with a face so blank it almost felt rehearsed. "You can't buy respect," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You'll always be inferior." That was it. No reaction to the gift, no acknowledgement of the effort, not even curiosity about why I gave it. Just that sentence. That final line, like a knife delivered without ceremony. I didn't say a word. I just reached out, took the watch back from his hands, closed the box, turned around, and walked out of the room. My shoes echoed down the hallway, and I could hear my mom saying something softly behind me, but I didn't stop. I stepped outside, the screen door slapping shut behind me, and made it to my car with my pulse pounding, but my face calm. I opened the door, got in, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Amber was standing by the porch, one hand raised in a half wave, her face twisted in confusion, like she couldn't quite figure out what had just happened. I didn't wave back. I didn't look at anyone else. I just turned onto the street and kept driving. And I didn't go back. The morning after the watch, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger exactly, though that was part of it. It was something colder, sharper, final. The quiet kind of resolve that settles in your chest when you realize you've been bleeding for people who never noticed the wound. I didn't hesitate. I walked into my office, opened my laptop, and started shutting it all down. The first thing I did was log into the family account, the one I had been maintaining under the name Family Expenses for years, the same one that had kept their mortgage afloat, paid for Amber's college, handled bills and emergencies and last-minute asks that were never framed as asks. I clicked through every auto payment and canceled each one. Mortgage, canceled. Insurance premiums, canceled. Cell phone plan, utilities, pest control, car note. Every single draft I'd set up or covered, gone. Then I transferred the remaining balance, $50,000 I had set aside as a buffer, just in case they needed another round of help, back into my personal reserve. It took about 10 minutes. 10 minutes to unwind 3 years of quiet sacrifice. 10 minutes to erase the financial leash I'd willingly slipped around my own neck. Then I called the bank. Told them I wanted to remove myself from all shared accounts. The woman on the phone asked me twice if I was sure. I said yes both times, without blinking. The silence after that was surreal. For the rest of the day, nothing. No texts. No calls. Just quiet. It felt like the moment right after you hit send on a resignation email. That weird floating calm before everything starts to fall. Then evening came. My phone lit up like it was on fire. 59 missed calls. 20 voicemails. All from them. My mother, my father, Amber. Messages that started calm and confused. Hey, Alex, there's something wrong with the mortgage app? And spiraled fast. We just saw the cancellation notices. You can't be serious. You betrayed us. What do we do now? How could you do this to your family? You think this is fair? Call us back right now. I didn't listen to all the voicemails. Just a few. My father's voice was sharp, furious, barely controlled, like a man who'd been humiliated and didn't know where to aim his rage. My mother's was more pleading, the kind of tone she used when she was trying to fix something without admitting anything was broken. Amber's was quiet. Just a sigh, followed by, I wish you'd told me first. But I hadn't, because telling them would have given them a chance to talk me out of it. And I was done being talked out of things. I was done carrying their weight while they pretended it was nothing. I didn't answer any of the calls. I just sat on the edge of my bed, phone face down, and listened to the quiet buzz as the voicemails kept rolling in. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. And that was enough. It was 3 days after I shut everything down when the knock came. I was home, working late on a proposal, still trying to adjust to the strange quiet that had taken over my life since the fallout. The phone had finally stopped ringing. I hadn't answered a single call, hadn't replied to a single text. I figured they'd given up. I figured wrong. It was just after 8. The knock wasn't frantic or angry. It was deliberate, slow, like someone who didn't care if you opened or not. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. A man I didn't recognize stood there in a black jacket, hands in his pockets, hat pulled low. He didn't knock again, just waited. I opened the door a few inches, kept the chain on. Can I help you? I asked. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes, and said, My father sends his regards. That was it. No explanation, no introduction. Just that line, like he was in some mob film. Then he turned and walked away like he hadn't just said something deeply unsettling. I shut the door, locked every deadbolt, and stood there, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I didn't recognize the guy, but the phrase sat in my chest like a weight. My father sends his regards. It didn't sound like a message. It sounded like a warning. The next morning, I found scratches near the lock on my front door. They weren't there the night before. They were small, faint, like someone had tested the deadbolt with a tool and then walked away. I told myself it could be anything. Maybe a delivery guy brushing against the door. Maybe my imagination, reaching, until I went to my car. On the windshield, under the wiper blade, was a photo. It was me, walking out of a coffee shop near my office. Taken from across the street, angled just enough to make it feel like a surveillance shot. On the bottom, in black marker, someone had written, You went too far. I stood in the parking lot with that photo in my hand, the chill of it creeping up my spine. I looked around, but the lot was empty. No one in sight. My hands were shaking a little. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove straight to the police station. I gave them everything. The photo, the scratches on the door, the strange man at my house. I showed them the doorbell camera footage, which luckily had recorded the guy's face clearly. The officer took notes, asked questions, promised to open an investigation. I figured that would be the end of it. A report, maybe a patrol car swinging by once or twice. But then he called me 2 days later. Turns out the man in the black jacket wasn't some random creep. He was a friend of my father's. A former private investigator. Retired, but still with contacts, still with enough of a chip on his shoulder to get involved in something like this. He hadn't broken in, not technically, but the cop made it clear they were taking it seriously now. The photo crossed a line. The message crossed a line. This wasn't just some family spat anymore. And all I could think was, Dale sent someone. He didn't show up himself. He didn't call. He didn't even write. He sent someone to my house to intimidate me, like I was an enemy, not his son. Like cutting off their financial leash had made me dangerous. Like he'd rather scare me than admit I had drawn a boundary. The detective offered to increase patrols around my place. Told me to install cameras inside, if I hadn't already. I had. Every corner of my house was wired now. Not because I was paranoid. Because I knew what Dale was capable of. Not violence. Not rage. Just quiet, strategic control. The kind of control that seeps in through favors and friends and old contacts who owe you something. And now I knew exactly how far he was willing to go to get it back. The trust was supposed to be untouchable. That's what my grandfather told us when he set it up. $900,000 divided evenly between me and Amber, held in a managed account that would only be fully accessible once we each turned 35. Until then, I had temporary management authority, interim rights, as it was called, strictly to monitor the portfolio and ensure disbursements were in line with the will. Nothing fancy, just oversight. But I took it seriously. It was the last real thing my grandfather left behind, and he'd trusted me with it for a reason. The trust had been quiet for years. No unexpected withdrawals, no red flags. Then, a few weeks after everything went down with the family, after the calls, the threats, the photo, I decided to check on the account. Not because I thought anything was wrong, but because something in my gut told me to look. I logged in, expecting to see the usual, a healthy portfolio, minor gains, the same quarterly statements. But something was off. The balance was short. Not by a little, by a lot. My share, my half of the trust, was missing nearly $140,000. At first, I thought it was an accounting error. Maybe the reporting tool glitched, or the financial firm was running an update. But then I started digging. I went into the itemized disbursements, traced each transaction line by line. That's when I found them. A cluster of payments over the last 9 months, all marked as grants to donor-advised funds or service fees to what looked like small business vendors. The names were bland, forgettable: North Pine Consulting, Hope Bridge Solutions, Genera Impact LLC. No flags on the surface. But when I ran a background check on the entities, one by one, nothing came up. No corporate registrations. No websites. No real tax IDs. Shells. Every single one. I requested detailed transfer histories through the trust's managing firm. It took some back and forth, some heavy pushing, but I finally got the full routing trail. All of the money, every dollar from those suspicious disbursements, had funneled through fake intermediaries and landed, eventually, in a single account. An account registered under my father's name. Dale. I just sat there, staring at the final document, the trail laid out in neat columns. Amount, date, transfer origin, final destination. It was there in black and white. He'd stolen from the trust. From me. From Amber too. Technically, though her share had been left untouched. Mine was the only portion that had been targeted. The irony nearly made me laugh. All these years he'd looked at me like I was soft, weak, less of a man. And he had been the one skimming money behind closed doors, laundering it through fake nonprofits like some second-rate con artist. And not just from me. From his own father's legacy. I printed every page. I saved digital copies, backed them up to 3 different drives, and scheduled a meeting with a financial crimes attorney that same week. But for a long time that night, I didn't do anything. I just sat at my desk with the printouts spread in front of me, trying to absorb what I already knew. This wasn't about money anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This was about control. About how far he'd go to maintain the illusion that he was still the one holding the family together, even if it meant tearing everything apart in the process. He stole from the future my grandfather tried to protect. He robbed from the one thing that was never supposed to be touched. And he did it with the same cold detachment he used when he told me I was inferior. I had been wrong. The line he crossed wasn't when he sent someone to my door. It was when he decided that even blood and legacy were his to rewrite. I sent Amber the report late at night, not sure if she'd even respond. I didn't write much, just attached the files, added a short message. You need to see this. It's not just me. I didn't expect a reply, at least not right away. But she called less than 20 minutes later, her voice tight and quiet, like someone trying to keep from shaking apart. "They stole from my trust?" she asked, barely getting the words out. I didn't have to answer. She already knew. She showed up at my place around 1 in the morning. I opened the door and saw her standing there in sweatpants and a hoodie. No makeup, her hair pulled back like she'd left in a hurry. She didn't say hello. She just walked in, set her bag down on my kitchen table, and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "This is everything I've been afraid to look at," she said, flipping it open with shaking hands. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew something was off. Inside were photocopies, screenshots, notarized documents, all with our mother's signature. Not Amber's. Not even close. One was a power of attorney form dated during her 3rd year of nursing school. Another was a letter authorizing a withdrawal from her trust account, something she said she never even knew existed. I looked through page after page. My mother had signed on her behalf multiple times. Then came the credit card statements. A Chase Visa opened in Amber's name 2 years ago. She never applied for it. But there it was. Dale had used her social, forged the application, and ran it up with what looked like home improvement charges and airline tickets. He made minimum payments, just enough to avoid alerts. She hadn't known a thing until she checked her credit report a few weeks back and started asking questions. Amber sat down, rubbed her temples like her whole brain was about to split in two. I thought they were just selfish. I didn't know they were thieves. We sat in silence for a long time. Neither of us touched the coffee I'd made. The documents sat between us like a third person at the table, their weight unmistakable. Then she said it, quiet but firm, staring straight at me. "Let's burn it all to hell." I looked at her. My perfect sister. The one who always played by the rules, who kept the family together in ways I never could. And now here she was, staring at the same fire I'd been standing in alone for years, finally seeing it for what it was. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something passed between us then. A shift. A click. Like the door between us had finally opened, and neither of us was walking through it alone. Vance and I sat across from each other in his office for nearly 7 hours, going through everything line by line. The trust records, the forged signatures, the fake business names, the transfer logs, the credit card in Amber's name, every last detail. He didn't say much at first, just nodded occasionally and scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad with handwriting so tight it looked printed. By the time we finished, we had a 43-page dossier. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. We weren't just compiling a case. We were building a weapon. We filed the complaint with the state's Financial Crimes Division that same afternoon. Vance submitted it electronically and then handed me a printed copy for my records, bound in a black folder that felt heavier than it looked. He told me not to expect fireworks, not right away. Investigations take time. Paper trails need to be verified, interviews scheduled, subpoenas issued. But he also said one thing very clearly. This is airtight. They're going to lose everything. 2 days later, the first shockwave hit. The bank filed to begin eviction proceedings on Dale and my mother's house. Not foreclosure. Eviction. Apparently, the mortgage hadn't just been unpaid since I cut the wire transfers. It hadn't been current in years. I had kept the payments flowing, but Dale had been rerouting funds, delaying bills, using short-term loans with predatory interest rates to cover gaps. Once I stopped paying, the whole rotten scaffolding collapsed. The bank moved fast. Notices were taped to the front door. A real estate agent showed up to take photos. The process server called their landline at 8:12 a.m., then again at 8:45. That was the day I stopped feeling even a trace of guilt. That same week, they got a letter from the Homeowners Association. A formal summons for a disciplinary hearing. The reason? Damaging the reputation of the neighborhood. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what it was. The neighbors had caught wind of the legal trouble. Someone must have seen the eviction notice. Maybe someone knew someone at the bank. Word travels fast in communities like theirs, where HOA newsletters are treated like sacred texts and lawn edges are measured with rulers. The same people who used to nod politely at Dale during morning walks were now filing complaints about the condition of the lawn, the discolored shingles on the roof, and disturbances of public order. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel disgusted. The man who preached about appearances, who talked about respect and discipline and pride, was now being hauled in front of the HOA like a delinquent teenager. And the best part? He couldn't even fight it. Not without revealing everything. Not without peeling back the curtain and admitting how much of his world had been propped up by deception. Amber and I watched it all unfold from a distance. We didn't celebrate. There was no champagne. Just long, quiet calls and shared glances that said more than either of us needed to. We were taking everything back, piece by piece. And they were watching it slip through their fingers, helpless for the first time in their lives. They lost everything. The house was the first to go. After the eviction notice, it didn't take long. A foreclosure auction was scheduled, and the neighbors wasted no time whispering about it. One by one, the golf buddies, the church friends, the neighborhood couples who used to drop by for wine and gossip, all of them disappeared. No one offered help. No one brought over casseroles or sympathy cards. When Dale and my mother packed their things into a rented van, they did it alone. They moved to a town in Arizona I'd never heard of, one of those flat, sun-bleached places with chain restaurants and endless rows of low stucco buildings. No announcement. No updated contact info. They just vanished. Amber found out from an old neighbor who spotted a moving truck in the driveway at dawn. That was it. No goodbyes. No explanations. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from my mother. It wasn't long. Just a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, her handwriting still careful and precise, like she was trying to make sure the lines stayed straight, even while everything else was falling apart. It read, "I don't know where your father put the rest of the money. He didn't tell me." No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just that one sentence, as if the damage could be minimized by shifting the blame. I forwarded the letter to Vance. He didn't say much, just asked for some time. 3 days later, he called me and said, "We found it." A third offshore account, hidden under an alias, tied to a shell company registered in the British Virgin Islands. The paper trail was thin, intentionally messy, but Vance's team had been digging through financial records long enough to recognize the fingerprints. There had been 3 major transfers totaling $178,000. Each one routed through different banks, cleaned, and parked in a private account that hadn't been touched in almost a year. Dale had siphoned it off slowly, methodically, like someone preparing for a storm he knew was coming. It wasn't even subtle. It was just buried, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and corporate smoke. But it was him, the same man who used to say that honesty was a man's backbone, who mocked my job and belittled my career. The same man who took my money, my trust, my name, and still called me inferior. When I saw the numbers on the report, I didn't feel shock. I didn't feel betrayal anymore either. I felt confirmation, like the final piece of a puzzle had dropped into place, and now I could finally step back and see the full picture for what it was. He hadn't just lied to us. He'd built his whole identity on lies. The family man, the provider, the disciplinarian. It was all theater. And now the curtain had dropped. There was no coming back from this. Not for them. Not for me. The house was gone, their status erased, their reputation hollowed out. They had run off to the desert, clinging to the last illusion that they could start over quietly. But even out there, the shadow followed. Every dollar they touched carried the echo of what they stole. Every lie they told now had a receipt attached. And I was done carrying the weight. The file came to me through one of Dale's former colleagues, someone I barely remembered, but who apparently remembered me. He used to work under my father during his time at a small but well-connected financial firm, long before Dale moved into private consulting. The guy sent me an email out of the blue, no greeting, no small talk, just a subject line that read, "You should see this." Attached were scanned PDFs, a blurry photocopy of a contract, and several pages of internal memos. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. Then I saw the words "insurance payout in case of unconfirmed loss." Buried deep in the paperwork were 2 policies. One for me, one for Amber. $700,000 on my name, $500,000 on hers. The beneficiary listed wasn't our mother. It wasn't even the family trust. It was Dale. The conditions were clear. The policies would only pay out in the event of a disappearance without recovery. No proof of death required. Just a documented absence, an unresolved case, and enough time for the claim to mature. It was written in the cold, clinical language of offshore insurance firms, the kind that specialize in niche cases and cater to people who want to stay below the radar. The policies had been written through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, masked by layers of legalese and brokerage intermediaries. But the contact emails, the signatures, the application handwriting, it was all his. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, heart pounding. These weren't accidental. These weren't theoretical. These were real, active policies, maintained quietly through low annual payments, updated in the system only 2 years ago. They were his plan B. If we disappeared, if something happened to me or Amber, if one of us vanished without a trace, he would be paid. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. No court case, no probate. Just a claim and a waiting period. I forwarded everything to Vance. When he called me back, his voice was different. Steadier. Slower. He said he'd seen a lot of things in his career, but this wasn't just fraud. It wasn't just theft or deception. This was something else. Something colder. I told Amber in person. I didn't want to risk sending it over email or through a call. When she saw the documents, she didn't speak for a long time. She just kept flipping through the pages, her lips pressed tight, her hands trembling. And then she said, "He didn't just want to control us. He wanted to have a way to profit if we stopped existing. That was it. No rage. No sobbing. Just the brutal truth sitting between us. I don't know what kind of man takes out policies like that on his own children. I don't know what he thought would happen. If it was about money, about power, about the final grip of control, maybe he never intended to act on it. Maybe it was just an idea in his back pocket, a quiet insurance against rebellion. But once you've seen it, once you've looked at your name next to a payout clause in case of your vanishing, you can't unsee it. You can't explain it away. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a blueprint. And we were the names written in ink. The final step was paperwork. Amber and I sat in Vance's office again, this time with hands steadier than before, signatures more certain. We signed documents to sever all legal ties, power of attorney revocations, trust control orders, affidavits of emancipation from parental obligation. It was a strange kind of liberation, cold and administrative, but also clean. No theatrics. No emotional collapse. Just names on paper that made it official. We were no longer tethered to them in any legal way. A few days later, Vance confirmed what we already suspected. Our parents had left the state. Their last known address was somewhere near the edge of a dried-up Arizona town, but even that was temporary. Mail forwarding was deactivated. Their phone numbers were disconnected. Their emails bounced back with delivery errors. They had vanished. Exactly the way they'd built those insurance policies, quietly, deliberately, and with no intention of looking back. I deleted every contact, blocked every address, wiped every trace of them from my phone. There wasn't even anger left at that point. Just a numbness that felt like silence after a long storm. The kind that doesn't feel like peace, but like the absence of noise. And then there was the watch. The Omega I had once believed might be a key to something. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Closure. It had sat in the top drawer of my desk for months, untouched since the day I took it back. I opened the drawer one last time, looked at the engraving. "Thank you for everything, Alex," and felt nothing. The words meant nothing now. They were carved into a lie. I donated it quietly to a charity auction that supports scholarships for kids in tech and engineering fields. The coordinator didn't know its backstory. She just smiled, thanked me, and moved it into a locked display case. Let someone else wear it. Let it become a gift for a future that deserves it. It had no place in mine anymore. And that was it. No final call. No confrontation. No apology. We closed the book. And this time, for good. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. I know it's been a long story, messy, painful, unbelievable at times, but it's real.